Welcome back to Paranormal Tedium, and this, the next episode in the series, Rich's Complete and Utter Breakdown. A series created in the now infamous Lard facility, where I check out the gadgets used by ghost hunters in their efforts to find evidence of the afterlife and other supernatural craziness and try to determine if they're any use. So strap in, this is going to be a long one, said the bishop to the actress. Alright, I'm ready for my close-up. In today's modern society, cameras are everywhere. They're in our homes, protecting our families and possessions, they watch us constantly when we're out and about, they're even out in space secretly keeping an eye on other countries and taking spectacular images of other worlds and of galaxies at the very edge of the visible universe. Most of us carry at least 2 cameras around with us every single day. And what do you fucking do with them? Take selfies and shots of your pets and food and then just post them onto social media. We can capture wonderful images of the world around us. But can cameras also see into the supernatural world? That's what we're here to find out. Cameras have come a long way since their humble beginnings back in the early 1800s. Actually, the camera's origins go much further back, with the invention of the device that later came to be known as the camera obscura, the earliest mentions of which date back to China in the 5th century BCE, but it wasn't until the 19th century CE that processors and chemicals were developed to be able to keep a permanent image onto media. Back then, cameras were just simple boxes with pinholes in the front, focusing light onto plates covered in photosensitive chemicals. They produced images like this. This is a picture of my great-great-grandmother circa 1880. But it wasn't long after the invention of what we now consider to be the modern camera before this guy, William H. Mulmer, brought spirit photography to the fore back in the early 1860s. Mulmer is credited as being the first person to produce spirit photographs, but was ultimately outed as a fraud. No, really? Mulmer stumbled upon spirit photography completely by accident when he reused a plate for a self-portrait that hadn't been fully cleaned. The resultant photo had a ghostly image, and a phenomenon was born. Although History.com describes one instance where Mulmer created a spirit photograph for a woman who had recently lost her brother in the Civil War. Then, the brother miraculously returned home alive. Awkward! But that hasn't stopped people in the time since presenting all manner of photographic and video evidence for the supernatural, from ghosts and shadow figures to cryptids and the occasional UFO. So how does your intrepid ghost hunter go about capturing this evidence? Now that we're in the digital age, there are a whole slew of devices able to take a still image and video to some extent or another. And these devices are becoming more affordable and accessible. But before I briefly go over the different types of photographic and video devices used by ghost hunters, how about giving this vid a thumbs up? The number of likes gives me an indication if I'm on the right track, along with the feedback I get in the comments. Feel free to offer suggestions on how I can improve, as they are greatly appreciated. Also, if you do like these vids, then please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. That way you'll know precisely when we upload more content. Let's start off with the most accessible piece of recording equipment in the modern age: mobile phones. As I mentioned near the start of this vid, most phones these days come equipped with at least 2 cameras, both front and rear facing, with the rear facing camera typically being the highest spec of the two. But the majority of the supposedly paranormal video footage that I've seen appears to be taken with the lower spec front facing camera. Usually whilst dancing and miming to some crappy chart music. Look, just don't get me started on twatting TikTok, okay? Admittedly, the specification disparity between front and rear cameras is becoming smaller all the time. But still. Next up are what I would say would historically be known as stills cameras. As previously mentioned, most, if not all cameras these days have video capabilities to some extent or another. These range from the relatively inexpensive point and clicks, through hybrid, all the way up to DSLRs and the newer mirrorless cameras. All do pretty much the same thing, with the only real difference being the type and size of sensor and image resolution. I'm not going to go into detail about all the varieties and permutations, but what I do want to point out is that cameras of this type have been modified by ghost hunters and ghost hunting equipment stores to be full spectrum. All this means is that the infrared filter, which is typically found in most cameras, has been removed, I performed the exact operation on this camera, thus allowing more of the near-infrared wavelength of light, which is undetectable by the human eye, to be picked up by the camera's sensor. Just a quick safety tip: if you do intend to perform this mod on one of your own cameras, remember to take the batteries out first. Also, even with the batteries out, the capacitors within the camera may still have charge, so any accidental touching of the circuit board, either with a screwdriver or a finger, may induce said capacitors to discharge, this being in the form of a loud snap, a spark, and potentially a bit of a jolt. Don't ask me how I know. This type of mod has also been performed on the next type of camera, action cams. Every bugger and their grandmothers know what these are. You can stick them and strap them pretty much anywhere, said the actress to the bishop. And I've definitely seen them used in investigations. The issue with action cams, when it comes to ghost hunting and paranormal evidence, is that they typically have a wide, or should I say wider, field of view than most cameras, which does tend to introduce an element of fisheye image distortion. Next up, camcorders. And more specifically, the night vision variants are what I would say are the mainstay of ghost hunting vids. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I would suggest that frame rate and resolution, or lack thereof, which I'll touch upon later in this vid, is a potential issue, especially in older and cheaper models. CCTV and home security footage definitely has its place in the spooky vid category, but again, cheaper versions also suffer from the same low frame rate and resolution issue, which I would suggest is a result of trying to maximise storage space for and cost effectiveness of each system. They're also susceptible to the same fisheye image distortion that action cams have. And finally, thermal imaging cameras. Although these aren't used frequently, they are still used. They can be handheld or attachments for mobile phones, but both have one overlooked, or simply just completely ignored, issue. Well, I say issue. It's not an issue as such, but I'll explain what I mean later. Now, before I go into the rational explanations of what could be causing people to think they've captured some supernatural evidence, I need to quickly run through some photography terms and concepts. I'll also highlight potential issues which will then help provide a better understanding of my explanations later on. As an avid amateur photographer, I read up on and researched all of the following info way before I even thought about buying a camera. But that's just me. I know this can get quite technical, so I'll try to go easy on you. By the way, these concepts apply to both stills photography and vids to some degree. If you already have a grounding in photography, then feel free to skip ahead. Having said that, I am going to make this next section an extra 20% funnier, so it's your choice. Aperture, depth of field, ISO and shutter speed are all terms linked to getting the desired shot, but knowing how they work and interact will show you what to consider when viewing alleged paranormal evidence. So here goes. Aperture describes the size of the hole within a camera's lens, which controls the amount of light through said lens and onto the camera's sensor. This is the same principle as the iris in your eye, but whereas your eye automatically reacts to the amount of light hitting your retina, thus expanding and contracting the iris, a camera's aperture is controllable. Assuming that is that you don't just leave your camera on full auto all the time. The wider the aperture, the more light is allowed through the lens. This range is defined in f-stops. The smaller the f number, the wider the aperture. But I'm not going to go into the how and why technicalities here. What I will highlight is the aperture size affects the next term that I'm going to discuss, depth of field. Have you ever noticed the way that some photos and vids have their subject in perfect focus, yet the background and or foreground are blurred? Well, that's down to the depth of field, which, as I've just mentioned, is determined by the aperture size. A wide aperture has a shallower depth of field than a smaller aperture. Thus, an image taken with a wide aperture setting has more background-foreground blur. This is not, however, the same as tilt shift, which is a completely different process and irrelevant to this vid, but I just wanted to point that out. Shutter speed refers to the amount of time a camera's sensor is exposed to the light entering via the lens. This is denoted in seconds or fractions thereof, and is indicated using vulgar fractions. The longer the shutter is open, the more light hits the sensor. But this means that if any part of the scene being shot is in motion, then there's more likelihood of motion blur being captured. Typically, a shutter speed of 1/250th of a second or shorter is required to have any chance of eliminating motion blur. As most ghost hunting investigations happen in near or complete darkness, this means that shutter speeds, depending upon aperture size, need to be slower to get an adequate exposure, thus making shots more susceptible to motion blur. Unless that is, the camera's ISO is altered. ISO is a callback to the days of film photography, where two standards for camera film, ASA and DIN, were combined into an international standard, hence ISO stands for International Standards Organization. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of exactly how it works in today's digital era, but generally speaking, ISO indicates how sensitive a camera's sensor is to the light hitting it. The higher the ISO value, the brighter the resultant image. Assuming aperture and shutter speed are left unaltered. The downside of raising a camera's ISO is that it introduces what's known as noise to an image. The higher the ISO value, the more this noise is noticeable. There's just one more thing to look at before we move on, which is specific to videos, and that's frame rate. Frame rate, or frames per second, is literally just that. How many frames of video are taken or shown per second. As I've mentioned in a previous video, having 4K footage at 60 frames per second has got to be better than having the same shot in standard definition and only running at 24 frames per second. You've only got to look at some of the Slow-Mo Guy vids. I'll put a link, go subscribe, to see how a higher frame rate helps you see more of what's going on and to better distinguish what you're actually seeing. This is extreme, I know, but it still proves my point. Right, now we can get to the crux of this vid.
Thank fuck for that.
And what could possibly be causing people to think they've captured paranormal evidence. Assuming that is, that it's not some camera glitch or fault, or they're not just out and out faking it, that is. You know who you are. Okay, we can't delay the inevitable, so we'll have to meet this first example head on. Orbs. Fucking orbs. The entire camera manufacturing industry has known for a very long time exactly what orbs are, to which they assigned the term backscatter. Also referred to as near camera reflection or as a defocus aberration, this is when light is reflected back into the camera lens from airborne particles between the camera and the subject. As these particles, whether they be dust, water vapour, raindrops, cobwebs or even insects, fall outside of that particular photo or video clip's focal point within the shot's depth of field. Thus, they show up as blurred blobs that are almost transparent. If, like me, you wear glasses, it's a similar situation if you get a speck on your lens whilst you're looking at something. I go into how dust is everywhere in greater detail in my laser grid vid. You can go check that out here. The Sony.co.uk website states that this phenomena tends to occur in low light environments and is typical when using a compact digital camera, or now that we're in the modern era, a mobile phone, and that this is due to the close proximity of the flash or camera light to the lens assembly. As ghost hunts definitely class as low light environments, is there any wonder that this occurs? There is another possibility to explain orb shots, and it's one that I've actually encountered, and that's dust on your sensor. This creates orb-like smudges on your photos, but unlike backscatter, this will appear in every photo you take until the sensor is cleaned. Oh, by the way, if you do see Steve out and about, please don't mention orbs within earshot. It will not, as Nuke says from Nuke's Top 5,
go well.
The previous processes don't just explain orbs. They can be used to explain certain types of light anomaly. These anomalies tend to be connected more with, but not exclusively to, full spectrum and night vision cameras. Your intrepid ghost hunter will say something like, "This light anomaly was picked up by a camera, but wasn't visible to anyone close by at the time of shooting." Well, let's just point a few things out that you've obviously overlooked or completely fucking ignored, shall we? 1. You're on a ghost hunt, so chances are there's low or no lighting. 2. Full spectrum and night vision cameras rely on infrared light, so you probably have an IR light source on or near your camera. 3. Particles and bugs do reflect light, including infrared, to some degree or another. And finally 4. As I mentioned earlier in the vid, your eyes don't twatting see into infrared. So there's no wonder you didn't fucking see it, you cockwomble. Still doesn't mean it's a ghost or spirit manifestation, just because you couldn't see it with your own eyes. Other light anomalies can be explained away by lens flare, light reflections, you name it. There are plenty of mundane things these light anomalies could be before we even start down the supernatural route. As mentioned earlier, frame rate and resolution play a big part in paranormal pics and vids. Low resolution and frame rates appear to be a staple, which is mostly used in an attempt to hide all the fakery that's going on. That and waving the camera around too much so everything's blurred. But this is mainly in the CCTV and home security vids where this is most evident. Usually in low light or night vision situations, this is where the lack of higher resolution and frame rate comes into play, as fast moving objects will appear as shadows or light blurs. They're also susceptible to the old bug on a lens strange shadow issue. Mainly due to the fact of where these cameras are usually placed in and on buildings. The day that we can buy affordable camcorders, CCTV and security cameras with full frame sensors recording 8K night vision footage in RAW format at 60 frames per second or higher, on that day, the entire ghost hunting community is going to disappear up its own arsehole. We're not there yet, but whilst we're on the subject of frame rate and resolution, I need to elaborate on my earlier comment with regards to thermal cameras. Both have one overlooked, or simply just completely ignored, issue. As thermal imaging cameras detect heat energy and not visible light, the sensors within them tend to be smaller, thus have a lower resolution than normal cameras that capture visible light. Having said that, you can get thermal images that have the equivalent of HD sensors, but this is typically in the 4:3 aspect ratio and not the usual 16:9. Thus, the resolution is 1440 by 1080 instead of 1920 by 1080. Not an issue, I just wanted to point that out. This, combined with typically lower frame rates, doesn't make for fantastic footage. But that's not what I wanted to get at. It's how these cameras function that appears to be misunderstood when reviewing thermal footage. Thermal imaging cameras only detect the surface heat emitted by surrounding objects. They don't detect the ambient heat of the volumetric air. So you can't detect cold spots with them, nor can they see through walls. Fuck you, Hollywood, fuck you! Reflective surfaces like mirrors, windows and any other highly polished or glass surfaces actually reflect heat energy. So detecting a heat anomaly in some part of a location where there doesn't appear to be anyone is potentially just a heat reflection. Finally, pareidolia, sometimes referred to as matrixing. Apparently that's another one attributed to the purveyor of ghost hunting bullshittery, Grant Wilson. Plays a big part when reviewing paranormal evidence. This isn't helped by the file formats that most mobiles and point-and-click cameras save images. The most common format is JPEG, which stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group, but now I'm just showing off. This is a highly compressed file format, which ultimately leads to what is commonly known as JPEG artifacting. The techterms.com website states that the JPEG compression algorithm is lossy, meaning some image quality is lost during the compression process, which makes parts of the image become noticeably blocky. It's this blockiness, especially in lower resolution images, that can sometimes be mistaken for faces or other supernatural occurrences. So there's a lot to consider when reviewing photographic or video evidence of otherworldly activity. And just because something's unexplained doesn't automatically mean it's paranormal. I've said it before and I'll say it again. And I'll keep on saying it till everyone bloody well listens. Only when you've eliminated every mundane possibility of what an anomaly could be can you then claim that what you state, however improbable, is the truth. But you don't fucking do that, do you? No, because that's not scary, exciting or entertaining. You just say it's all paranormal and wait for the likes, subscriptions and payments from YouTube to roll in. The ghost hunting community doesn't appear to be about finding the truth anymore. It's all about the wonga. Okay, I've gone on for long enough. To conclude then, as I ranted earlier, I predict that as higher spec equipment becomes cheaper and more accessible, the number of ghost images and videos will become fewer and far between, as we're able to capture this evidence in greater detail with a higher dynamic range between the shadows and the highlights. Which ultimately means that YouTube channels like Paranormal Tedium will have to adapt to new content or be resigned to YouTube's fuck it bucket. On that happy note, we'll end the vid there. We still have plenty of time before any of that happens, so do stick around. Please give this vid a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I've got more breakdown vids in the pipeline, so remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You'll then know exactly when they get uploaded. These new vids will be added to the growing Complete and Utter Breakdown playlist. If you haven't seen any or all of the other episodes yet, then go check them out. Well, go on then. What are you waiting for? Thanks for watching.